Welcome to the Pacific Wayfinder. This is a special series celebrating the 20th anniversary of RAMSI, the Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands, celebrating our region united. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Solomon Islands descended into civil conflict in a period known as the tensions. The Solomon Islands government asked its Pacific family for help. The Pacific answered the call. The Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands, RAMSI, arrived in peace on July 24, 2003, and departed in friendship on June 30, 2017. Thousands of police, military, and civilian personnel drawn from across the Pacific. 15 contributing countries, 14 years, 7 RAMSI special coordinators, one very special place, Solomon Islands. My name is Aka Rimon, and I'm your host. And I've got with me today my co-host, Dr. Henry Ivarature, and Professor Dave Peebles. Hi, Dave. Hi, Henry.
Hello, friends. Dave, you spent a long time in Solomon Islands. What was your favorite place in Solomon Islands?
I had so many places favourite places in Solomon Islands. So, Henry, perhaps I can say that and not offend anyone. So I had lots and lots of favourite places in Solomon Islands. But our family did have a particular soft spot for Savo Island, which was off the coast of Guadalcanal. And Sir Alan Kemakeza, who was the former Prime Minister, always made us feel extremely welcome there. And gee whiz, we had a lot of fine pig with Sir Alan. But the wonderful thing about Savo was that you could swim with dolphins, you could climb a volcano, you could meet big megapod birds and try their eggs for breakfast, and you could go fishing. So it was just a really special place to us and to our family. But as I say, lots of favourite places in Solomon Islands.
So Dave, you returned to Honiara recently.
Yes, it's always good to be back in the Happy Isles, but my brother Henry always makes me work very hard. So I did do some interviews when I was in Honiara. And today's interview is with Peter May, who is the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Peace. And Prime Minister Sogavari set up this ministry, and the idea was that this was the ministry that would continue the ongoing peace-building work in Solomon Islands. So I think Peter's interview is very interesting to hear what he has to tell us about that.
During the tension period, it was a chaotic situation. It's a whole host of breakdowns when tension or the conflict happened in the country. It unseated all that has been built economically, socially, and of course, given the fact that the country is so diverse and much of its dependencies in Honiara, because that's where the center of the conflict, machinery become dysfunctional to the lowest minimum level. That also cripples dependency of citizens in terms of service delivery, public health, education. Specifically, schools are shut down, and it drags, and the downfall of an economy, the downfall of social infrastructures, and the downfall of that cohesion among society leads to other further complications actually on that. State revenue was able to run down very fast, and so resulting in public servants into long unpaid leave. It was catastrophic, chaotic. And all that is matters for a society. It's a whole host of social ills, it's a whole host of unfortunate situations and elements that the country faces. And the foremost of it is the economics, the economy of the country, and the functioning of state institutions.
What was it like when RAMSI arrived, and
What are your reflections now, 20 years after RAMSI arrived?
It was a relief, but it was a blessing, you know, a model and a moment into which where state rejuvenates, you know, state returns to its resilience point, as was before the days of the tension, actually. Because the machinery of government, economic governance, and law and justice initiatives that RAMSI came with practically enables their return. Though I understand that there are a lot of things to actually negotiate or to work into institutions. So there's a whole host to deal with the capability of the police. Just the trust, confidence, but the arrival of RAMSI or RAMSI intervention, it's like it is an alternate towards a government machinery that will be looking forward. It is an enabling environment in building institutions that will then bring the country into its forward look. Confidence of investors mounted, you know, because of the ability of public fund delivery. The country can able to get back its revenue and get back its foot into more bigger development. So I suppose, in short, this importance of confidence, importance of stability, and importance of citizenry having more faith on the institutions of government. And you could see a functional court again. You could see a functioning legal institution. And of course, Pacific Island neighbors or partners that were part of the personal, also on the civil side of it, which is public servants. They are more like in our rebuilding or reform and reconstruction or reform and rebuild aspect, the things that are necessary to actually enhance or the return of the state institutions. RAMSI, it is a state building initiative. RAMSI is so sensitive and so more foresight in a way that building or rebuilding of its institution will be something that provides that enabling environment for those institutions. I mean, capability in financing, capability in integrity institution in government, which is public service, prime minister's office, the corruption, commission, and the rest of those things. And so that regionalism kind of like weaved it. And it came with a kind of good understanding in that regard. So that's why the help and friend mentality or notion kicks in. Hence, RAMSI was just at the right time. It was just an intervention at the right time and for the right purpose. In justice, because I could easily see that, oh, it was very effective.
How important do you think that was to RAMSI, having Pacific representatives working alongside Solomon Islands to help them friend?
RAMSI inclusivity did actually enhances regionalism. No regionalism says, but what I mean is that sovereignty is intact. Part of sovereignty, which is state machinery, is rebuilt and reformed and bringing legitimacy government to its form. So this whole idea of democracy, political democracy, to get its right footing or to get back into its normalcy. That's number one. Number two, you find that the societal relationship with the citizenry, so much from the state welfare-based approach, the citizenry participation, engagement, and relationship is a given in this RAMSI. And that is so exemplarily manifested during the days of RAMSI. And given that RAMSI had a huge communication network, they were well received by communities actually during those times. They were well received by the community at the time, simply because of this citizenry state relationship. They see less on being an intervention, more on a friend at the time that is needed for a good common purpose. And in this case, bringing back Solomon Islands again in its feet. We look after a huge ocean landscape, and we are so closely needed, interlinked with cultural, trading, affairs matters. When you're in crisis in such a situation, given the regions and other peculiarities surrounding it, what kind of modality would be important. And this is why I suppose that for state building, and this is why I suppose that the RAMSI seems suited in this regard.
I was just wondering if you could share with us your thoughts on the opportunities and also the challenges before Solomon Islands today.
To RAMSI, who establish institutions or bring back institutions, able enough to give a more confidence position to the state institutions to actually respond to the broader peace building that we currently work on. And because, across government, we need all of us, for the revenues that we are doing peace building work and consultations and dialogue. And so having created an effective institutions during days of Ramses would then give way, would then enable and give way to the peace building work that we do in the ministry, though even if our place in Ramsey is to some certain extent. The work that institutions abide to normalcy enables the peace building architect in the country on that, because government have a big portion or have a major portion into the peace building process, and the environment is not stable. And so law and order up and running, it kind of like permeates or leads us into a comfortable environment to do continuous dialogue in the root causes of the tension. The transitional justice, for example, through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission establishment, it functions so effectively in an environment into which when Ramsey came up, or when Ramsey came or arrived and then actually invested into institutions that bring normalcy. And so it enables the transitional justice progress in the country more smoother in terms of them doing consultations, public hearings, in an environment that is not atrocious, that is not feeling uncomfortable, but the broader environment is more conducive. And of course, maybe the last would be that environment is so conducive that we could able to deliver. A shift has now taken place, the geopolitical environment in the country and in the region. This is a new theater now, But given the early entry of Ramsey, we could able now to have some confidence. We could able now to have some more energy into the institutions to actually be able to accommodate this new shift of landscape in the country and as well in the region. Had we have not had a Ramsey, we will be still struggling perhaps, and we met this geopolitical challenge with us. It would be adds more to our uncomfortable environment or situation. So it was like a good given that we got able not to help the country, or the country is able not to be at a position where it could accommodate other emerging challenges.
A very interesting story about Solomon Islands journey.
I think that's right, Henry. I think the Permanent Secretary has a really fascinating job, and I was really grateful to him for sharing his knowledge with us.
Our next guest is former RAMSI Special Coordinator, Nicholas Koppel, who is joining us from Melbourne. Thank you, Nicholas.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
One of your key priorities as RAMSI Special Coordinator was the process known as transition. Could you explain what was involved in transition?
Transition was a major area of work as for the period of time in which I was RAMSI Special Coordinator. That's very, very correct. Transition essentially was moving from the initial framework and establishment of RAMSI into something else, which was more sustainable. Transition is a word which indicates a process. So what was important, we all felt on all sides, the Forum, Solomon Islands Government, Australia, and other participating countries, was that it would be wrong to go to a cold turkey where you just suddenly withdraw all that RAMSI has done and RAMSI's entire process. So the alternative to just a sudden withdrawal is transition. So that's the big word for it, but behind all that was a lot of work that needed to be done. And what do we mean by transition? And RAMSI has many components. we have to make decisions on each one of those components. What's the correct staging? What's the correct timing? How do we bring everybody on board? How do we explain that to the people of Solomon Islands? So, just to give you some idea of why it was the major preoccupation of the time that I was special coordinator of RAMSI, is all these issues needed to be addressed, and everyone needed to understand that process.
In any of these state building processes, it's obviously critical to judge the point at which external assistance can step back, neither too early nor too late. What were some of the factors on your mind?
Well, a number of factors. One was, well, let me take it in parts, because we have the military component, we have a policing component, and we had a development assistance component, the three pillars, if you like, of RAMSI. On the security side, which relates to the military and the police, the main factor which was on my mind is that the conditions which led to RAMSI's arrival, which was, the widespread militancy, the use of firearms to achieve objectives, the government being beholden to people with guns, that situation had very much changed. Partly largely the withdrawal of firearms from the community, but also we didn't see militancy. And so I think the judgment was that the military component could be the first to leave. The policing component had two parts to it. I mean, one was the law and order situation in Solomon Islands, but secondly, it was also a very important task of RAMSI's participating police force to train and develop the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force, and that needed to happen before the participating police force could withdraw. So the military could leave first, but a judgment was that the policing component needed more time, particularly to build, to have confidence in the community, but secondly, to train up the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force. The Development Assistance Program was a more straightforward decision because, in effect, most of its programs were transferred to bilateral donors, predominantly the Australian Development Assistance Program in Solomon Islands, but also in part to the New Zealand's development program too. So they were the main considerations. What were the how would things be received? How would things be continued? How could we make sure that the gains which had been secured would not be lost straight away?
Thanks very much, Nicholas. There was some nervousness in the community about these changes to RAMSI. How did you go about reassuring Solomon Islanders over this period?
The nervousness was not confined to the people of Solomon Islands. I mean, of course, all the contributing countries, Australia, New Zealand, and all the others, the Pacific Islands Forum, all too were very concerned that the transition of RAMSI and the withdrawal of components of RAMSI would not lead to a return to the troubles which had beset Solomon Islands. So there was a lot of persuasion to be done about the staging and the timing of RAMSI's transition. But of course, the people of Solomon Islands were critical as well. If the people were not comfortable with what was happening, the great risk that people would be very anxious returning to villages. It would have effects on the economy. There might even be demonstrations about RAMSI's withdrawal, potentially. So in terms of dealing with that, I think the most important thing was communication. And communication which involved not just, RAMSI and the people of RAMSI, but also Solomon Islands government. And so we had the representatives from the Solomon Islands government join RAMSI on a program, an extensive program of regional tours to take the message into the communities, and also a large public diplomacy program where RAMSI's transition was explained. I must, be honest that we did all these things, but at the end of the day, there always is a degree of residual apprehension about RAMSI's withdrawal, and because the future is not known, we can't be sure, we can't be 100% guarantee that nothing adverse is going to happen after RAMSI's withdrawal. So it's not a leap into the dark, but it is a step. And of course, there's some anxiety about that. But the point of the consultations and the community outreach programs is to explain the process to the best of our abilities with a range of voices so that people could understand things in their own language, but also hear it from their own government and, persuade as many people as possible that it's not something to be too anxious about.
How did you feel on the final day when the military component of RAMSI concluded and the Pacific military personnel departed?
Well, it was mixed feelings. I mean, we had developed obviously very good relationships with the military personnel, particularly with the commander of the military component. But also it was a feeling that RAMSI had come to do a particular job, and one element of that job had been accomplished. The ongoing presence of the military, I mean, on the one hand, it provides a security underwriting of the situation in Solomon Islands. But what we were aiming to do is for law and order issues to be seen primarily as the responsibility of a police force rather than a military force, and indeed to be seen as a responsibility of a Solomon Islands police force rather than a foreign presence. That was important because it needs the confidence of the people of Solomon Islands had been shattered by their tensions, had very much undermined the confidence of the people of Solomon Islands, but also undermined the confidence of businesses from around the world. I mean, I remember very clearly meeting with the CEO of one of the major cruise lines and trying to encourage the cruise ships to return to Solomon Islands. And she said, how can we? How can we? You've still got a military component there. And how can we sell that as a peaceful country? And that people will be welcome when there are military there. So, in boardrooms around the world, anyone who's potentially thinking of investing in Solomon Islands, they would see that situation and see it as a negative. So in a way, an ongoing military presence, yes, it can provide additional security and feelings of comfort to those in the country, but it's also having negative consequences as well. So it's a judgment. When is the right time, and how do you manage that process? But on that day, how did I feel? I felt the time was right. I felt it was the right decision, and it yes, a tinge of sadness to see them go, but also a feeling that what RAMSI had come to achieve had been achieved in that dimension. Further work to be done in other areas, to be sure, but some progress had been made, and this was an acknowledgement of that progress.
What were some of your other personal highlights from your time as special coordinator?
Well, I enjoyed very much the traveling through every province of Solomon Islands. I went to some very remote areas. I mean, some of them, the transport to get there was a little difficult, and sometimes the accommodation was very basic. But in everywhere I went, and this was important for me as part of my education about the situation in Solomon Islands, everywhere I went, it was a very warm welcome and a very peaceful country. There are many development challenges, there are many problems that Solomon Islands faces, but the problems which were the cause or the justification for RAMSI coming in, the need for RAMSI, had gone. There's some continued need for state building, but the aspects of law and order, the militancy, the guns in the community, in all my travels through Solomon Islands, I never encountered those sorts of problems. The other thing I really enjoyed about my time in Solomon Islands was, and this is going to sound like a cliche, but believe me, it's true, is the friendliness of the people. Some of the people who worked for me, particularly the Europeans, were very deferential on, sir, you're special coordinator, and addressing me very formally. But when I went traveling in the Solomon Islands, just ordinary village people would just come and talk to me, sort of as human to human. And it was very genuine. very affectionate and very moving. And, I like that. I mean, it can be very lonely if you're at the top of an organization and everybody's relationship with you is a very formal one. And traveling in the Solomon Islands, meeting with Solomon Islands people from all walks of life was I found very enjoyable and very it helped me relax very much as well.
What was the best thing about RAMSI for you both?
If you were selected to participate, it was a truly blessing event. And at the time, not only that, we knew, because I came with the first team, that we were representing a country. We had the most appropriate training in preparation for our presence in the Solomon Islands. And it was felt that we were working together with the community. So it was kind of, it was all that it was very critical and important that we did so. And I'm glad that I was selected to be one of the participants at the time.
When I got there, it was all, all in a peaceful state. It was not how Itu would have been there for the first time. The best thing for me, if I have to say in a nutshell, is that building relationship and friendship within that mission, knowing that you're there to help your neighbor, your counterparts on the other side, to bring back what it is required as the standard policing service that is required by the community to maintain peace and order within the Solomon Islands. So to me, the best thing out of my deployment, my whole year deployment, would have been the relationships I built and the friendships I made in the Solomon Islands.
It was also the working environment was very different, and you do learn from it and appreciate the new cultures. You're working with members that value their respective cultures, and I'm talking about the Pacific Islanders that we worked together. But there was something in common that we had, so those are the most beautiful things in life. And that what we had in common was just that respect for each other, and I thought that was beautiful.
For me personally, I had to look after police officers from about 13 countries in total at the time. Not only that, I had to work alongside and I had to mentor a senior officer within RSIPF in the policy and strategy unit for the RSIPF. I was lucky to mentor someone who, her name is Stanley Riolo. He was an inspector at the time, and I know that he's being promoted now, and he's a acting assistant commissioner of corporate service for the whole RSIPF. So he's moved on in the corporate ladder. The local police, they had a sense of pride, wanting to do so good and so well for their own country. All they needed was a different voice, a different reassurance from us advisors to say, hey, you can do the job. They're all intelligent people, and they knew what they were doing.
It's just so amazing. The willingness to help each other was there. And the reason why I'm saying this, because we didn't have any difficulties in trying to work together as a team. Because I was a Tongan, there were many other Pacific Islanders that worked under, I suppose, my direction at the time, including Kiribati members from Fiji, likewise Samoa, and the Cook Islands. They were the first 6 countries that arrived the Solomon Islands. The working spirit was high. The respect for each other was maintained. I believe because there were some common commonalities in the cultures and appreciation of each other. It was a very beautiful feeling. For me personally, it was willingness to help. So when I got here, I almost can't wait to share my experience and what we were doing, and any success stories it was shared. I was also happy to help in any ways, in any means. I was so impressed with what was available in the Solomon Islands. I learned a lot, and that experience, that is what I brought back home.
I feel that my inner strength was built a lot stronger when I was away, and seeing what was happening in the Solomon Islands, and what I could draw some comparisons, of course, of what was happening there, what was happening at home. There are things that you need to do consistently, like I've touched on before, but also to be careful that you build your inner strength and your inner capability, your institutional strength for Tonga Police, knowing that the locals can carry on the business. And that's the sustainable way of doing things. So I think that was the biggest learning for me, and very applicable because we were at the time undergoing, and still are now undergoing reform and having, development partners, and relying on them on a lot of things. So I'm more alert of that factor now, and it does inject. I do use that in the decision making for the organization. I do say my bit when this is happening, and more so now because with the geopolitical competition within the region, with all these high powers coming in the presence in the region now, we have love and attention left, right, and center. Someone has to coordinate and manage it a lot better, so that we can only take what is useful for us, Tonga Police, and what will benefit us, rather than just saying yes to every handout because of their own interests. So that's a lot that I'm saying here, but that's how I see, and that's what I've taken away from the RAMSI mission or deployment to where we are now, and that's very useful also to what I do now in the Tonga Police.
It was very emotional to majority of us, my team members, and which constitutes of 8 members altogether. Rather emotional, but it was much more encouraging knowing that the status of many places just around Honiara was much better at the time. So it was a positive feeling at the end.
You feel that I'm making a difference here. When you go to do missions like this, you have to touch the hearts and the minds, change. It's a mind and behavioral change that you're after. Building that relationship and together. It's not just the skills that you're imparting, then that also that the level of confidence. You're building their confidence, the emotional reassurance. I also feel that the team that I had, encountered while I was there, other than the Pacific Islanders, which some of them I stayed in touch with them. Some have retired from policing.
Well, thanks, Henry, and thanks, Dave, and thank you to all our viewers and listeners. We'll see you next time on this special series of Pacific Wayfinder, celebrating the 20th anniversary of RAMSI, celebrating our region united.